When we started Honeycomb, we were in our mid-20s. This was actually our fourth business that we explored. And one of the things that we realized at one point was, why are we avoiding exploring a business in the space that we actually do as our profession?
What was your reason?
When my experience of the agency model for a long time was just churn and burn, which isn't fun for anyone.
What was the mindset that it took to even venture into this world and say, I'm going to make a company out of this?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it probably starts with
John Bevitt. John is a co-founder of Honeycomb Strategy. This is a guy that makes research sexy. The research that John does for organizations can carry over into almost any field in that it is based on human behavior. How can your research be used? Like you said, connect with the customers. So there's, like you said, cutting edge tech involved.
What's interesting with our business Honeycomb is that we essentially look at things from a first principles perspective.
Yeah.
The whole concept of that is going, well, if we were trying to solve a problem now with everything that has existed historically and present, what's the optimal kind of solution that solves that?
What is your outlook on AI?
AI is interesting. I absolutely still think
Sometimes it's a breakdown before a breakthrough. Take us there.
so.
Well, John, you founded a company that does cutting edge research that has like a human-centered approach. It sounds fascinating. Can you unpack that for me a little bit, please?
Yeah, where do I start? So I might start with, what is market research? It's probably a good starting point, because whenever I talk to people who aren't kind of in that zone, the first question is like, what is it? Like, is that kind of like the focus groups? Like, that's often people's like anchor into research.
Yeah.
And if you think about any kind of TV show, like Mad Men's a good example, where it probably puts focus groups in a really kind of specific light.
Yes.
Silicon Valley is another example. If anyone's seen those scenes where it's like, and what do you think, James? And then James answers, and so you play it back and go, so James, you said this, and it's very robotic.
Yeah.
Essentially what research is really about connecting businesses with their customers and helping them understand what are the needs that they are looking to have solved, so that businesses can actually design a service or a product that's solving that problem.
Yeah, wow.
And so that's kind of where we come in, where we essentially help these businesses connect to the heart of what customers are looking for, both consciously, what they say, and subconsciously, the underlying drivers that inform their thinking.
Yeah, okay. Oh, I like this, because there's so much human psychology in there.
Absolutely.
You
That's
mentioned
my
it. I love this. You mentioned something really important there. It's like, connect with the heart of their customers, right? So it's amazing how many businesses don't actually know their customer. Like they might say, oh, everyone, but like everyone's kind of no one, right? Yep. So, I mean, how could your research be used? Like you said, connect with the customers. So I'm just thinking about this. Like, is there cutting edge tech involved?
Yeah, absolutely. What's interesting with our business Honeycomb is that we essentially look at things from a first principles perspective.
Yeah.
The whole concept of that is going, well, if we were trying to solve a problem now with everything that has existed historically and present, what's the optimal kind of solution that solves that? And it's a really interesting challenge, because it means that we are like methodology agnostic. We're not kind of at the whims of the tools that we have, because we're always questioning what's the right tool that can solve the problem for us now. And so what we often find is that there's essentially like a merge of the tried and true traditional kind of methods, like focus groups, as we spoke about, but also finding ways to incorporate AI into how we operate, finding ways to understand the latest thinking in behavioral science, all that kind of stuff. So it's very broad spectrum. And you're kind of approaching both the problem and the approach to the problem with a very open mind to go, how could we solve this today with everything that exists and everything that we know works or could work?
Oh, like there's so many variables.
There's a bit of experimentation to that as well.
And I sort of like that, because like life's a big experiment too. Though in business, like, I've studied flow a fair bit, as you may know, and what I've uncovered really, like in personal life, in passion pursuits, in sports, in academia, in business, like the concept of flow is available to us regardless. In business though, it's just got a much clearer scoreboard, like not as clear as sport, but it's clearer than like your personal life, because a lot of the relationships kind of blur lines. So like this does sound like it's valuable to businesses, but it's no small sort of project to embark on What did it take? Like, what was the mindset that it took to even venture into this world and say, I'm going to make a company out of this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it probably starts with the age that we started Honeycomb. So I was in my mid-20s. My background was in research. So I'd worked at companies that did research before. So there's probably pros and cons to being a technical founder as well, because it's very hard to get off the tools, but you can understand the day-to-day of the operations of that. But what's the traditional way of starting a research agency? You've typically been in the industry until you're in your 40s. Then you go, I've kind of hit the cap of what I can achieve. I'm going to go out on my own.
That would be the normal reason. That's the normal reason people do it. That's the normal
journey that people go through.
What was your reason?
When we started Honeycomb, we were in our mid-20s. This was actually our fourth kind of business that we explored, ranging from things like an online gift registry for weddings to monthly tampon subscription delivery service. Like, we're trying all these different things. And one of the things that we realized at one point was, why are we avoiding exploring a business in the space that we actually do as our profession? And part of that was because we felt, that's not the normal thing. Like, that's not a thing you worry about till you're in your 40s. But also we kind of had a little bit of bad experience. Like, the traditional agency model, as any kind of agency in this space, is pretty hectic. It's all hustle. They churn through juniors because they're working from 7 till 10, all that kind of stuff. So my experience of the agency model for a long time was just churn and burn, very transactional, which isn't fun for anyone. And we essentially went, but what if we could create a place where people would want to come to, where they can do their best work and feel that they could be themselves? And that was kind of the foundation that drove me to go, let's give this a go and see what we can do. There were some obvious challenges with that, because then as someone in their mid-20s, they go, well, how can this industry take us seriously? Maybe we play it safe and work with like small businesses, because, they don't know what research is, and maybe we could find a foot through, like a way into the door there. But we ended up backing ourselves. Our clients are all leading brands, big corporates. And essentially the realization for us was, like, how could we make our age a feature, not a bug? And a way through that was about going, well, youth is all about innovation and trying new things and experimenting. And that's how we started Honeycomb.
Oh, I like it. Look, there's so many things there but they're all really key nuggets. Like, your observations of the problems in typical agency world, and then this thing that you seem really hung up on about the age. So, like, it seemed like a barrier that you had kind of created for yourself.
Limiting beliefs, absolutely, like self-imposed barriers, and something I've become a little bit addicted to, of trying to remove and set free. More often than not. And there's a lot I've learned in hindsight where I'm like, if I only got out of my own way, I probably could have been further. I could have been more successful. Even that in itself is a limiting belief.
Exactly, because you've actually still learned the whole way, right?
Yeah. So the first thing is kind of realizing that, like, what are those stories you tell yourself? And then the second thing is, like, how do you break that habit and try something new?
So how did you, like, there would have been like all these options. Like, it seems like you're a serial entrepreneur. You and your wife, business partner, co-founder, Renata. And she sounds like, from our discussions previously, like very creative, very artistic. And, you've come from the research background, technical founder, like you said. But to be assessing other needs, like, the monthly tampon delivery service, that actually just sounds really sensible to me. I'm sure that there's a whole bunch of other things that need to be taken into account. But to be looking at that, to be looking at the other offerings that you had, and then you came back to your own company, or your own field. What was the mindset required to look at that problem, that self-limiting belief, and then hop over it?
There's always a breakdown before the breakthrough, as they say. Renata and I, both technical researchers, we both actually worked at the same company in different states. That's how we kind of met in the field.
Another workplace romance.
Oh, I love it. It started a worrying trend. But we had always had that entrepreneurial mindset. Like, in high school, I used to find hats because of the whole no hat, no play rule and rent them back to the people as a way. So that was a business model we had.
Now, I saw you use quote marks there. When you say find, does that mean you might have come across a couple of these in some other way?
They might have haphazardly been left next to their bag and I was opportunistic and maybe borrowed it and rented it back to them. So it's not that like they lost it. It was just that they were paying a lease for it.
Well, almost like paying for your security to stop them losing it properly. It's like an insurance policy that you were selling
Correct.
without calling it that.
Yeah, exactly. At least they knew who to go to always get their hat back for a fee.
Sounds a little bit mafia-esque, but like, you created a market there and it sounds like you had pretty willing customers.
Yeah, absolutely. No hat, no play. You need it to be able to get to the playground and play some sport. But I guess the pattern of this was we're always looking for problems to solve and we're always quite, both of us independent and willing to challenge what's accepted as the norm. And I think that's kind of what pushed us in that direction in the first place to go, why do we need to wait till we're 40 to do this? Why can't we do it now? There's a degree of impatience and there was a degree of, I guess, youthful ambivalence or lack of awareness of how hard this could be. In psychology, there's this kind of concept called the Dunning-Kruger curve where it's essentially like a peak where you've got a little bit of experience and you've got the peak of confidence.
Yes.
Whereas it's not until you really get the experience that you become a bit more humble in your approach. And I think we started Honeycomb at that peak of the Dunning-Kruger curve, which I think was to our benefit.
Yeah.
Because you didn't know how hard it will be. And we've been through the gauntlet and learned a lot of lessons along the way. But I would rather learn those lessons now in my 20s and 30s than when I'm in my 40s and 50s. So positive and negatives of both.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, it sounds like there's some subconscious awareness of like kind of backing yourself. But I love this Dunning-Kruger curve because it's sort of like the competency wheel, the unconsciously
100%.
incompetent. Now I'm conscious of my incompetence. Now it's really hard to do it, but I can do it. It's consciously competent. Now it's unconsciously competent.
Yep.
And I find like the best example of that is when I learned to drive a car, it was just like, absolutely, I had to learn to drive a manual. Now, I had 3 vehicles before, three registered cars before I actually even got my P's or L's. I was just so keen, and I was always into motorbikes and stuff, but it had to be a manual. And I had to get my P's on my first day I tried, you know. And you think about what's going on when you get out there and not like I've been learning in paddocks and on abandoned roads and whatever else, and then now I'm on the road. Now it's extremely exciting, but like, okay, I'm coming up to a set of lights. And I'm like, I've got a back shift. I'm using clutches, there's lights. There's now traffic. There's people trying to change lanes on me. And the road rules aren't quite fully etched yet, even though you know enough to pass the test. And then I compare that to like just 1 year later. I'm probably still on my P's at this point, or just very close because I only had the red P's back in those days. And, going down and, cheeseburger in one hand, changing hands, probably back then on the mobile phone because,
you could blind text back in the day because you had physical buttons. So I remember driving and I was just like writing SMSs.
Yeah. Oh, look, I get that. Now you said sometimes there's a breakdown before a breakthrough. Take us there.
Which one should I start?
Well, the one immediately before the breakthrough, but any of the breakthroughs is fine.
I mean, when we first started, so before we started Honeycomb, I was working at Seek.com.
Okay.
I was working in their marketing team, or across marketing and product in an insights role, which is around working with research.
Okay.
Renata was at another agency, and we kind of came up with this realization and went, well, why don't we give this a go? But obviously, taking a hit and losing 2 salaries was a bit scary. So Renata actually did the first 12 months solo. She left her agency job, and I was kind of working at a big corporate, financially supporting, working in the evenings, trying to work out this thing. And it was hard, like getting our foot in the door of these big corporates was not easy. At one point, we were like, well, like I said, let's go into the small, medium enterprise because maybe that's how we could teach people about research. And we had one client back us and give us a project and then another and another. And so 10, 11, 12 months later, we made the call of let's back ourselves and jump into this.
Yeah.
And that's only when the challenge has really begun, to be honest, because now there were 2 of us, we'd fully committed. We're getting a couple projects here and there that because there's 2 of you can kind of fund it.
Yeah.
But how do you go from that where you're essentially just glorified freelancers to becoming a legit business? And to be honest, I'm still not sure if we're a legit business in my head. Like, at what point do I go, yes, now we're legit? We multi-million-dollar agency. We've got a team of 8 at the moment. We work with the biggest brands, Australia and globally.
8 full-time researchers.
Yes.
That's a lot. Like, I've seen research companies before, and they've usually got 1 or 2 internal, and they kind of scope jobs out, like they just farm them out. So, that's a business.
So like there's been a couple points where I'm like, now we're legit. And then I'm like, but baby, now we're legit. So again, self-limiting beliefs. But the first breakthrough was having to just back ourselves and jump in the deep end and go, well, why don't we see how this goes? The next personal milestone for me was Renata was originally the managing director, and I was kind of running support, and then we flipped the script and I stepped into the managing director role, and she moved on to founder and director. So that's how we split it out. And the big breakdown for me was all of a sudden the full accountability lay on me. And I didn't know how to handle that initially. So that's probably the first key breakdown for me that led to the breakthrough of going, like, why not? Like, why aren't I capable? And so I kind of had this realization. I've done a lot of personal development, but I came to the realization then that I had this self-talk of, if I haven't done something before, then I don't know how to do it. And that self-talk prevented me from looking for a solution because I was focusing on the problem. And I had this reframe of going, well, what if I change the story to being, if I haven't done something before, why don't I just find someone who has done it before and learn from them? And that kind of got me a little bit addicted to this growth journey of going, well, how about reading books? How about listening to podcasts? How about finding mentors? How about creating this mental advisory board so that when I go to sleep, I ask them questions so that in my subconscious, when I wake up, I've actually got some answers, or at least have the consciousness and confidence to execute on things.
Wow, that's pretty advanced
It
stuff.
didn't happen overnight, but in retrospect, it all kind of happened off that moment.
Wow. Okay, so this sort of breakdown before the breakthrough that you've just talked about, like the flipping of the script, you becoming managing director. Now you've got accountability, like you've got ownership and accountability for this working, and your wife had gone ahead of you. So when you were thinking about, like, I haven't done this before, I've got all these self-limiting beliefs, like, you've then gone and assembled a mental advisory board, which is the technique I use, but I got coaching to get to that. So what was, like, was it a person that gave you that insight? Where did that come from?
The first one was probably like Tony Robbins. We went to like an Unleash the Power Within.
UPW, a bit of firewalking.
Did a bit of firewalking 6 times. So I've done firewalking a few times now.
What, you did UPW 6 times?
Yeah, like we volunteered there and stuff like that. Like we kind of drank the Kool-Aid a little bit on that journey, but I'd never heard of him before then. Renata essentially went, why don't we give this guy a go? She knew of him. I'm like, sure. And I'll just come up. And then that's kind of what blew my mind, just having that realization that your mind is not who you are. It's just the filter in front of you that tries to help evaluate what the world looks like and how to progress through that safely. And I think that was a big moment for me where I'm like, all of a sudden I could question how I think. I could question my beliefs, my values, my background, what I was taught to believe as a kid. And that's really what got the ball rolling. So since then, it's just about diving into there's been a lot of self-help things. I've had a performance coach for the last 4 or 5 years who's been phenomenal to do a lot of deep work. I'm just really hungry to learn and grow. And you mentioned earlier, like, if you feel like you have all the answers, that's where you stop growing, and that's where you actually fall backwards. And
well, in business, it's really easy. It's like, when the learning stops, the earning stops. Now, that sort of segues me a little bit, because like that's an amazing arc you've had there. And look, I'll say that Tony Robbins has been personally significant for me. I found myself in a very dark time after a relationship breakup. It rocked me in a way I didn't expect. I saw myself as a very practical romantic in that, like, we find someone, we get smitten, and then we sort of like over time amalgamate and make it work, And, I thought I was in a long, forever relationship. And then it just suddenly ended, and it was just really obscure how it ended. So I was pretty down, and someone around me, not a person I would probably take life advice off today, but at the time it was proximity. Proximity is power. And that person had already been through their own arc when they'd had a separation and decided on what they want to do with their career. And they said, I've got this Tony Robbins kit. It cost me $2,500 and I can lend it to you. Now, when he lent it to me, it was like, I don't know, somewhere between 05. It was about 06, 07.
Yep.
Like, so we're going back a bit.
Yep.
But for me, it feels like yesterday because I was on that journey and I get handed this big thing and it's like tapes or CDs. I think it was CDs.
Yep.
But still, CDs, like, you know, it seems foreign now. But, you know, and it was 21 days to change anything in your life. It was like a ultimate success program. Must have been one of his signature ones he used to sell from the stage.
Yep.
And I did it. And man, it was like a lot of work. Every morning I was doing this work and I was recapping during the day or in the night when I got home. And it was an intense period. But I reckon in 21 days, I did make enough change to then go and pull mentors into my life that weren't there.
Yep.
You know, so like, and what Tony Robbins later tells us when I went to UPW many years later with my wife was that people see him as a motivational coach and he doesn't like describing himself as that. He's a strategist.
Yep.
The strategy is a plan from getting from wherever you are to whatever's next, if it's going somewhere, and usually it is changing.
Yep.
So it's a strategy to change, and all the pumping and stuff like that, the priming, he's doing that to prime the system to receive the messages.
100%.
So you've been kind of doing that yourself in some way.
Yeah. And I think to Tony's credit with UPW, the immersive environment was probably the reason why it forced me to learn. For a long time was a really chronic procrastinator, and so it's very easy to push things off.
Yeah.
Whereas I think being forced in that environment for 4 days, morning, noon, night, nonstop, kind of made me really accountable to look inwards and not kind of push that back.
Yeah.
And that was a big thing that just really helped to push through those limiting beliefs. And now it's been a while since I've done it. Now I've got 2 little ones. I've done a couple virtual sessions, but it's a good reminder of like the importance of doing those immersive moments, whether it's through Tony Robbins or through just self-work.
Yeah.
And then doing little touch-ups along the way to keep you on that trend of growth.
Yeah, I like that. You can really design a bit of a life plan in there, or you can just design a plan to go from where you are to the very next step. It depends where you are. So yeah, with that, you've got a wife, business partner, co-founder, and a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. Now the 4-year-old sounds like roughly COVID baby.
Yeah, Asher was a COVID baby. He was born in July 2020, so like smack bang in the middle of it. Yeah.
Okay. So that would have been a bit intense. So your business had already been running at that stage for like 3+ years.
Yep.
You're in Melbourne, Australia.
Yep.
One of the most locked down cities on the planet.
Yep.
You're a research company, so admittedly, it might not be as belly to belly as every other business, but you're still trying to get this thing up and going and create productivity and all that. How was that challenge? Like, how was that challenge, that combination of circumstances there?
I was going to say it's pretty fucking scary, but I think in the moment it was hard to kind of feel how hectic that period was. Like January 2020 was when we invested in a big standalone private office because we're like, we've had growth year on year. This is the year we scale and we'll bring in lots of people and stuff like that. So we kind of put in a lot of overheads at that point. Yeah. Asher was born midway through the year, midway through lockdown. So it wasn't just the financial accountability of the business, but the financial accountability of keeping a small human alive and thriving. So I think that was quite scary. And there was that period where, as with everyone and clearly with corporates, there was a pause to go, well, what does this actually mean? Is this a short-term problem? Is this a long-term problem? Let's just stop spending for a second so we can work out what to do. And as a business that needs money from corporates as our lifeblood to fund our survival and our lifestyle, that was a little bit scary. Where everything just got put on pause. And so we had to go, well, how do we have a meaningful conversation to help people know how to move forward? And so we ended up bringing 6 of our VIP clients into a Zoom call. First time they'd ever had a Zoom call, and just got them together and helped them workshop where should they spend their money? What are they holding off on?
6 clients from separate businesses
all
together.
Different companies, didn't conflict with each other, all in similar roles. And it was a learning session that we helped to facilitate to go, how can we learn from each other? To give them, the outcome for us was about how can we give them the certainty that there are still things that they can spend money on. But we just did it as a way of adding value. So you add this to the point that Renata is on, she was supposed to be on mat leave. That didn't happen because of the stage of the business that we were in. She was like running a debrief while she was in labor. Like it was that kind of thing.
Wow.
Took a couple of weeks off, then got back into work. We're both highly sleep deprived because babies don't let you sleep. And we're trying to keep the business alive at the same time. I was looking at my phone a while ago, and between the cute photos of little babies, there were photos of me holding said sleeping baby with a glass of bourbon. And it probably pushed a little too close to alcoholism than I'd like.
Hey,
so I was clearly coping with it in some way.
Yeah. Well, look, I remember that period as being intense. What you're talking about as a combination of events there is very intense.
Yeah.
And that little reflection you've made about the glass of bourbon in the hand and it got a bit close to alcoholism. I don't know if it was around the rest of the world like this, but in Australia, it seemed like a badge of honor that everyone was at home day drinking.
Yeah.
Did you see that? I was invited into LinkedIn things with proper business people. These aren't people that are just looking for an excuse to get drunk, although maybe they were, but they would be putting together things like this in one way or another anyway. But during COVID, it was like, order a drink from your local hospitality venue because then you can support a local business, get it delivered to your house, and we will run a session about what's going to happen in the world, and we'll all drink these drinks. Now, I like old fashions, right? I used to drink a lot more than I do now. But at that time, I was still very much on the regular drinking scene.
Very similar, yeah.
Yeah, and so I got this from the Kotetsu, and it's an old fashioned. It's made on, Rittenhouse Rye, and I go, and I'd buy it. And of course I wouldn't buy the single shot. I'd buy the one that had a keeper pack, but then I'd drink it during the LinkedIn Zoom. Yep. And I'm thinking my tolerance was coming up really high and no one was really saying anything otherwise. I know I was working my brain out at the time, but I think there was a lot of that going on, that kind of floating around, coping a little bit. So that would have taken a little while to adjust from when things started to normalize again. How did you process that period?
I think so. And I think there was definitely a degree of self-medication and self-soothing. And I'm in a entrepreneurs group on the EO Entrepreneurs Organization, and my group of entrepreneurs were equally sending similar kind of selfies with glasses of bourbon. And it's no shock that some of the organizations that thrived the most were bottle lows. Yeah. We all had to kind of cope some way. And Melbourne was to your point, one of the worst lockdowns. I remember having to do full Indiana Jones, rolling under the shutter gates of Woolworths to get a bag of nappies for my little one at 7:30. Yeah. It's just really crazy time.
Indiana Jones, like the Temple of Doom when he went back and got the hat.
It was intense. But I think it was at a point where this could be longer than it is, but it's also too long that it's hard to manage. It's probably not sustainable to just keep doing that. Yeah. So that was a big prompt for me to actually kind of just clean up, find a way to exercise instead of just be a homebody, get some fresh air, get some sun. Yeah. All those things that help get you in the right headspace, because doing things partially sober don't get you in the right headspace to be in the flow.
No, exactly. Well, you've done a good job of that because you're still in business, and we say this, survive first, then evolve and thrive. It's Darwin's theory played out. In business in particular, I think Darwin's theory is very evident. Yeah. So you've survived, you've evolved, you've thrived, and here we are. We're on the cusp of 2025, and AI has happened since COVID, right? And when I say happened, you and I both know AI has been around for decades. My early days of AI, engineering background, and one of the electronics components that I did, diploma in electronics engineering, I did programmable logic controllers, PLCs, which was just logic programmed in advance, which is what a lot of chatbots were up until a couple of years ago. Yep. And then generative AI released to the world, ChatGPT, and now the others. You're probably well placed to give your opinion on this. And I'm curious, on your personal sort of insight, what is your outlook on AI from, you're in research, that's a very big part of it, but because you're in research, you're getting to see a lot more. Yeah. In relation to AI, are there things that you are counseling people to be really aware of or fearful of? Or is it all sort of sunshine and rainbows?
Macro level, I welcome our AI overlords. Like I feel like that's just a trend of being a little bit more optimistic towards this, but there also has to be a degree of like proactive paranoia to how we approach this. To your point, AI has existed for a long time. I think where it like hit mainstream was all of a sudden like the chat interface made it easy for the layman to be able to interact with AI, which is what blew it up. Up until that point, it was held back by technical specialists.
Yeah.
Very similar way to research, where to do research properly, you really need to understand the nuance in language and the impact of leading questions and things like that and coming at it from an open, unbiased opinion. AI is interesting. I absolutely still think that we're in the Wild West era of what AI is now. And so there's a lot of questions around, well, what could this mean in 6 months, let alone in 5 years, because it keeps changing. New features and functionalities keeps being added as new GPT versions are released. And it's really pushing everyone to go, well, what skill set should I be working on developing? Coding is essentially, for all intents and purposes, now a passion project because AI can essentially do the majority of that on its own.
It's almost like learning calligraphy or something. Like you don't need it anymore.
It's a fancy hobby. Like you do you. It's like driving a manual.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I caught up with a guy in AI only a few weeks ago, and he said within like 3 to 5 years that all code will be in the English language if you even use it. You just be basically saying what you want.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm kind of looking at it with a very open mind to go, how can we find ways to use it? Because like if you're more of a tech laggard and you're pushing against this out of fear, you're just falling behind because it's still moving forwards and people are still using it to the point where I think like Sam Altman essentially spoke about the fact that some of his friends have a sweepstakes around like when will the first one-person unicorn come into fruition. And that was a good prompt for me to go, actually, there's a huge thing in AI that can help businesses scale without necessarily adding more people.
Yes.
And a big thing as a professional services agency is like, how can I decouple headcount with revenue growth?
Yes.
Because the traditional way of looking at it is you have to add more heads to grow revenue.
Yeah.
Humans are still very, very important. And I think that's a key thing that people forget. Like a lot of people are going, how can I have less humans?
Yeah.
Which is okay, but it doesn't mean you eliminate humans altogether. And so our philosophy of it is how can we augment the great work that humans do by using AI to kind of fill in the stuff that no one wants to do or could be done a lot quicker.
Yeah. I imagine that's got a big impact on research. What about in the home? You've got a business partner at home, you've got a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, you've got a very broad lens on this. You're a researcher, so you're objective. You're allowed to take a side for yourself. How do you see AI impacting home life?
For the positive, I mean, the very first experiment I did with ChatGPT was I went, here's all the ingredients in my fridge. Help me come up with some recipes for the week for a family of 3. And that was like where I was like, okay, this thing has some potential.
Yeah.
Being a bit of a tech geek, I'm in the midway through setting up my house as a smart home. So I like data. And so all of a sudden I can get a lot of that data. It's not easy to be able to understand that data on your own, even as a researcher, expert, advanced statistician. So having AI to help kind of chunk that down and help give me a direction on where are the things that I could improve on is where AI can be really powerful. And it's the same benefit for businesses. It's the same benefit for personal. It's like, how can I make the most of the mess that exists of all the data and all this information that's surrounding me?
Yeah.
How can I distill that into something that allows me to take the next step?
I like that. As a researcher, you commented on it before, but I've known a few over my time, quite a few. And, you mentioned it, the questions you ask, whether they're leading questions or whether they're just questions, but the questions you ask are really going to tell us whether AI is going to be helpful for us or not. So how would you coach someone in their home life to ask better questions of AI? Where do they start for that?
I mean, the first thing I do whenever there's a new topic is I might ask AI, what are the questions that someone could ask you to get to this outcome?
Yeah.
So the biggest thing I try and have clarity on is what is the end outcome that I'm trying to achieve from this?
Yeah.
And being quite open to how I get there.
Yeah.
I think that's really important because it's very similar with how we interact with clients, right? Sometimes a client might go, can you do this specific analysis? And then they leave it there. And if you don't understand what they're trying to achieve for that, then you can do that, but it's only going to move you one step forward, and it could potentially be in the wrong step.
Yeah.
If I go, what are we trying to achieve here? Like, how can I help you achieve that end goal? And the client's open to that, and they're open to trying to find a solution as opposed to being specific about the solution, then that is what really helps to make sure that you deliver what they need.
Yeah.
So if I'm trying to teach someone to ask AI productive questions, I would first start with the outcome in mind. I'm trying to achieve this for this reason.
Start with the end in mind.
Start with the end in mind.
Stephen Covey.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of this is like prompt engineering is a whole thing. It's becoming less important as AI gets more sophisticated because it can infer things a bit better. But as a researcher whose job is to try and understand what questions lead to what outcomes, there's a nice like parallel to prompt engineering because then you can start to play around with it. I've sometimes spent like multiple hours coming up with a prompt or working with ChatGPT or Claude to actually come up with the outcome before I've then asked it the specific question.
Yes.
I've learned that the more I put in, the better quality I get back. And so that's also a thing. You can't expect to get an answer by just asking it one sentence question. You've got to build it so it understands the context.
My prompts are often like minutes long.
Yeah.
Like, so I do majority, I don't know about you, I do the majority of mine speaking to it at full speed.
I'm the same.
Like, because, and the dictation or the transcription of ChatGPT's app compared to all of the others so far is like A grade, like triple A grade. Like Siri, not quite yet. Loom, not quite yet. Like most of the others, Otter. But if I speak like flat out, when I look at what it has turned that into, it's already done work on it before I hit submit because it's just submitting text after that, after all.
Totally. Yeah, I'm the same. I find that even though the words don't all come out smoothly when I talk, I'm more naturally able to communicate with ChatGPT through voice than through text.
Yeah.
Because I'm spending more energy trying to find out what are the right words to put in the input.
Yes.
Whereas if I'm just having a conversation, this happens a lot when I drive. Because driving, so it's ready and listening. I'm not playing with my phone while I'm driving.
Yeah.
But I can at least have a conversation with it and go, cool, I'm going to try and work what I'm actually trying to solve. I know that it can go through all the noise and work out what I need. So I'm not spending energy trying to work out what the right words are.
Yeah, I'm
and that is a game changer for me. They recently rolled that out to desktop now. So I've got the team looking at me when I'm talking to my laptop now. Yeah. Because it's just quicker.
Yeah. I've been using the double tap on control, which is an Apple thing, and it just does the Siri thing for you. Yep. But that's definitely the way to do it on the app. So we talked about home life. We talked about, what you're talking about there. So people are basically asking what rather than how, because the how is something to be a bit flexible on.
Yeah.
How did you go about that with working with your co-founder, who's also the mother of your children, who also lives in the same house? How? Or what?
I think the one advantage that I have here is that we worked together before we were together.
Yeah.
But it's so funny because it's not something we like promote or actively communicate, but it's also not a bug either. It's like, typically like if someone joins the team, then first thing we go is, by the way, like we're married. Most of our clients know, but it's not something that's like in our branding or anything like that.
Okay.
Part of that is because we don't want it to be like, we don't think it's necessarily the thing that makes us different. It's just a fact.
Yeah.
But the amount of times whenever I talk about, the first thing someone says typically is, oh, geez, I can't imagine working with my partner. And I'm like, that's cool. Like, you do you, mate. But for us, it's always been our reality. And so we've kind of just had to learn how to make that work.
Yeah.
Some of the biggest challenges, I guess, is like, how do you make sure you're not talking about work all the time?
Yeah.
And as a parent, it's now how do you stop talking about work and children all the time, and just making sure we have time for each other to spend time as just a couple. But I think the biggest thing for us is working out that we actually have very complementary skill sets. And so we're not necessarily doubling up on too much. That was a key one for us. Like, I thrive on people. And so I'm largely responsible for the team, the interactions with clients. Renata's so creative and uber resourceful. And so we'll put her on essentially called special projects. So those initiatives where you're trying to break something and build it up together to something really cool.
It's like the Steve Jobs philosophy, like get the founder over in what they are brilliant at
Yeah.
just creation. Well, if that's their thing,
Yeah.
it's sort of like myself. Like I've got bricks and mortar offices in Newcastle, Lake Macquarie, New South Wales, and I do visit those with high impact when I'm there. Core customer visits, team, close friends, community groups. And to observe, like an observer, then I get the hell out of the way and I go focus on R&D again, which is still involving all the same people, but it's in a different environment.
100%. Yeah, we often talk about this. We use the language of like working and celebrating your superpowers, and that's one of our values of our business. So something we learned from each other, we now bake into how we approach our team and business too. And like if I talk about what a superpower is, I often explain it as like, what are those things that feel innately natural for you that other people think is hard to execute on?
Yeah.
Or they're like, how do you do that? It seems so natural for you.
So what's your superpower?
I've got two. One, I've kind of like feel like I've nailed more than the other. The other one's still a work in progress because the language is half the fun of it.
Yeah.
So my first one is making the complex simple and the simple compelling.
Yeah.
Because simplifying it is only one thing. You've actually got to then actually motivate people to do something off the back of that. And then the other one, I think I used to call it like wearing people down to the point that they love me. But I think it's more about there's always something in common. Like no matter how diverse someone is that I'm interacting with, there's always that one thing that I will always be able to find that allows me to build rapport and connect with them. And I think that's very important when it comes to research and relationships about like you don't need to align everything with a person. So you just need to be able to have empathy. And empathy means that you can connect with someone no matter if they're a criminal, no matter if they're someone you've never met or like a loved one. We all have a very different perspective on life. And it's always just about being a little bit curious so you can find that thing that you have in common, and that's how you connect with someone. So
I like
they're
that.
probably my two.
Yeah, that's
How about
great.
yours, Mark?
Yeah, like mine are invention and wonder.
Yeah, I like it.
And that's putting a category on them. And wonder is really like, and it usually goes wonder, invention, and then it's discernment, galvanizing, enablement, tenacity. You know, and there's 6 types. Patrick Lencioni came up with that. It's 6 types of working genius, but it actually plays out in every part of life. It's not just business. It's really nice how it docks in. So invention's my number 1, wonder's my number 2, which are really closely linked.
Yeah.
Wonder is like, I wonder if we could put a computer on every desk in the world. You know, like it's got to be a big problem, but is this problem even worth solving? And people that are good at wonder are good at that.
Yeah.
And then invention is like, okay, well, there's a problem worth solving, but how do I get from this global kind of huge idea to putting it into something that I can rally people around? And so like the next thing then is to discern it. Like, is this actually going to work? Like it's great to say that, but where's the drawing the line from there to there? So I'm reasonably natural at discernment. There's just more energy required. Whereas invention, it's like I've finished inventing something a lot of the time before someone's finished saying the problem. Not because I'm trying to jump the gun. Like I'm a freestyle rapper. It's exactly how that works. I'm inventing the next line before I finish saying the current one because I'm confident about where it's going. So wonder and invention being linked together. The ones that drain me are enablement and tenacity. That doesn't mean I'm not tenacious. Tenacious, like, you know, as a descriptor is like, I will drive this thing home. I will make sure it works, but I'll usually do that through others. I'm not the one doing every piece of it at the end of the line of the system that I've wondered about, invented, discerned, rallied others around with galvanizing, helped a few people get going and make sure it's a good idea, and then be there to finish it, because then I run out of invention energy. And inventors need to keep inventing. Creators need to keep creating. Musicians, similar sort of thing.
Work to your strengths. Right?
Exactly.
So important. That's where you kind of talk about, well, what's your kryptonite? Because then at least if you have awareness of that, then you can hire to fill in that gap or find someone that has that as their superpower, and then you find a great partnership.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the things I was really challenged with on this, John, particularly in business. You know, like I was an entrepreneur before I had an official title. You know, like before I worked at Macca's, I was flipping motorbikes, you know, and I was fletching arrows in archery. You know, there was always something. I was selling paper planes when I was like in my, you know, single digits in places that weren't very good to sell them, but I had to do something. When I got into business, and real estate ended up being the one that we started as our own company, and I started as a business owner instead of an operator somewhere, and like I'm paying every coach I can get around me, I'm tracking the pros, I'm doing research sort of in the ways that you had to do it in 04, 05, it wasn't as available. And rapport. Everyone's talking about rapport. I did psychology. I did NLP. I'm a practitioner in NLP now. And all of that was done to understand myself better and to understand others.
Yeah.
And with rapport, though, I think it's really challenging when someone's got a role that requires them to be someone else. Actors, I think, would find this hard. Politicians, I won't go there. But any professional where they're building rapport, psychologists are building rapport. And B2B sales, you're building rapport. It's happening naturally all the time. But the challenge about building rapport is empathy is a very big part of it. And, I've been described as an empath by certain psychometric profiling and all the stuff that goes with it. Yeah, so we understand people's perspective. And when we understand the perspective, we can know them on a level like we are them almost. They see that, they're comfortable. We actually end up mirroring and matching.
Yep.
But there is energy required for that. And when we're chewing bandwidth all the time, showing up in a way that makes it easier for others to interpret us and understand us, then over time, it can be like this subtle draining of battery. It's sort of like having the location turned on your phone. Yeah. Without knowing it, you got an app running in the background. You're like, why does my battery keep going from 85 to 12?
You turn it off and it's like, oh my God, I've got another 2 hours of battery.
Yeah, exactly. So as soon as we understand our kryptonite, we can do that. And another thing here that this docks into so well is, you're passionate about something I'm very passionate about. It's authenticity. Yep. And I feel like my arc personally in the last couple of years has been even more pronounced on that because most of my time, and I don't regret this or resent anyone for it, I've been creating business models, making the business as good as it could be for the people within it. Because I've got a model to make it amazing for customers, yet I haven't made it as much for customers for the other people in the business. So I've had to remodel that thing. Yeah. And then when it comes to the next phase of it, I suppose, in that because I've been showing up as so many different people for so long and I'm presenting in the way that the business needed me to, I hadn't actually grown my own authentic personal brand. And so these conversations we're having today are really about looking beyond the individual career or what someone's known for and tapping into who they are, who they want to be, not so much what they want to be known for.
Yep.
So tell us more about your passion for authenticity.
Yeah, I think it might go slightly beyond passion to obsession because everything that I do now is really centered around being as authentic as possible. And to your point on energy draining, probably one of the things I realized a while ago was just how much energy it takes being someone who you're not actually or pretending to be someone you're not.
Yeah.
And so if you work in a company where you're told or taught to fit in a specific mold and that's the only way you succeed, you're essentially adding layers that take up compute.
Yeah.
If you look at yourself as a computer, you're filling up all of your RAM with doing all of this superficial shit that doesn't actually serve the core purpose of what you as a computer are supposed to do. So what I spent a long time doing is how can I remove all of those masks and actually first learn who I am truly as a person, not a reflection of what I've been taught I'm supposed to be, which was probably the first thing for me. But then how can I lead and encourage other people to have an authentic life? Because the way I look at it is if you are in an environment where you're encouraged to be authentic, you operate from a place where your best self means you can do the best work and you can actually enjoy it because you're spending all your time doing fun shit and not spending time trying to please others or coming from a place of ego, which is typically all of those additional layers that you're taught to have. And so for a long time, even in the last 12 months, trying to find out what are my values that I hold true to myself and trying to understand what are situations where I'm not being true to my values. And my relationship with alcohol was actually a little bit like that. Sounds like I'm an alcoholic. I'm not. But I used to be able to connect with people through going out and having a drink. But I realized that at home, I don't drink anymore. It's not something I enjoy. So I would find that I would kind of compromise on my values to please someone else, and that people pleasing habit is something that I've been working for a long time to eliminate.
Yeah.
But I've always kind of looked at it, if I go to my core authentic self, is how can I lead a life where I'm true to my values and I don't feel the need to compromise because I know and love who I am. It's true to myself and that's it. So that's kind of the ethos of how I try and operate and try go, how can I do things that are truly authentic to who I am as a person? And the positive side effect of that and teaching others to do that in my company is that people love working with us, that you don't feel like a robot. You don't expect them to respond in a certain way because they're just humans. And to like, if you're in a business of humans, you need to connect with the humans. And the best way to do that is to be authentic.
Man, that's so powerful. So powerful. I have a share on that personally, that one of the things that I found a lot when I got into real estate, and I'd come from engineering background, trades engineering. I was at MC in a hip hop group, managing bands and events. You can imagine the sort of creativity flying around me, what I was wearing, what I looked like. And then I went into that mold. And then there was a period of time where I wanted to have the shiny black shoes and the tie and all that so that my looks were unremarkable, and what was remarkable was the service I was giving or the value I was adding, right? And I think that was functional. I don't have a problem with that. And it's those later periods where I was more of a leader than I was a practitioner and still practicing in the market. And a lot of that sort of people pleasing was going on for people in my own organization. Some still there, some not. Most of them have moved on in other ways just because we weren't a perfect fit. But I was less okay with that at the time.
Yep.
And I felt that I really needed to make sure they understood why I was doing things, or I just had to be a different person for all of them because they had insecurities about them being authentic as well. Now, that's not blaming anyone. These are just observations I've made. And different townships that I've worked within as well, like some townships are smaller communities.
Yep.
They're bumping into each other more often. So when something steps outside the box, they're more likely to say, hey, what's going on with that? It might be curiosity, but it doesn't come across that way. And you're like, oh, I'm being judged here. I better respond in a certain way, which is a political answer, which is, again, not authentic. Yeah. And then they go home and think about, what do they mean by that? And then they see them again, and then that person's awkward, and they see they're awkward, and then they become awkward. And you can see how this plays out. It's very 100%. Hard work.
Yeah.
Whether it's a small community, the household you're in, the office you're in, the social media you show up on. But just recently on one of the tours I went at, and I helped on ground with the auctions. Now, I was really there to speak directly to our customers. Yeah. I wanted to hear them before, during, and after, how they were being treated. I announced it to the people before we start bidding. One of our measures of success in friendly auctions is what the underbidders say about how they were treated, right? Yep. It's not just about this top line result, big result, big result. Talk to the buyer and the seller and the underbidder.
Yep.
And I was hearing it for really real time, and I had the mic on, but I had this kind of shirt on. It's a black mesh shirt. It doesn't look like a real estate shirt. Someone said to one
too sexy for real estate.
Too sexy for real estate. And like a few of my staff like, oh, he's moved down to Melbourne now. Like the brakes are off, And look, I've always loved creative clothing. This is like very Japanese sort of style I'm rocking right now. It's pretty warm in Melbourne in the summer.
Oh, I like it. It's inspiring.
It's my vibe. And I always wanted to be free. Yep. When I got around prop tech in in the 2000 to 2015 era, and I started investing in scale ups and advisory, and I was on advisory boards, I'd turn up in the room and there'd be no one in a suit. Yep. And I was so like, wow, this is like on Valley of the Boom. Yep. Those sort of, look at these guys, they're tech people. But they were not tech people. They were like entrepreneurs, real estate people, whatever, but they were comfortable in their skin. And I started realizing when I used to go into appointments and sign up houses for $5 and $10 million or projects for $100 million, most of the people I was signing up weren't dressed in suits either. Even if they were surgeons home from work, they were in a T-shirt.
100%. I think was it Mark Cuban who was talking about like the person with the power in the room is the person who wears the most casual clothing.
Yeah.
Because they don't give a shit what other people think about you. I think that's really interesting because like for me, it's like feeling comfortable in my skin. I think you hit the nail on the head with that one because sometimes that is with clothing, but it's also very much how you look at yourself and how you see within.
Am I happy with what I'm seeing here in the mirror?
Totally. Yeah. And I am honestly my own biggest fan. I make myself laugh all the time. I'm not sure how many people have that pleasure.
It's a great trait. I believe it can be developed.
Myself. Yeah.
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 That's gold. That's gold. Well, here's the closer because this has just been so powerful. I could keep going for 2 hours. But we're not kind of Joe Rogan experience yet for being able to hold an audience for 3 hours or thereabouts. But we will get there. This could be the one that takes it all the way. John, if you could go back to a time when you were in one of your darkest moments, what would the advice with your level of self-awareness now be to that person in that dark moment?
Probably the biggest thing is like just trust that you can do it and get out of your own way. My industry teaches you to think. And I think I'm very conscious of falling into overthink sometimes. And it's often why you look at the most successful entrepreneurs are not the smartest people in the room, they're the people that execute.
Yeah.
So a big thing for me is just stop overthinking and just do and trust yourself. I'm telling myself this right now, but having conviction as well, like trusting your version of the truth and backing yourself. If I told myself that at 25, 26, I'd probably be way ahead. But you're not going to mess with time because you never know what happens.
Yeah.
It's also why I don't have any regrets about my journey. It's probably taken longer than I'd like, but if I changed anything, I wouldn't be where I am today. And I love where I am today. So
Exactly. Yeah. Look, that's beautiful. And I agree. I wouldn't change anything. There's been really challenging. I said this on stage recently when I spoke because a few people were asking the question, like I got a big smear in the media a couple of years ago. And you know, it was a smear. It was deliberate, and we got evidence from a regulator to say that none of that was going on. It wasn't consumers. It was mostly competitors. But anyway, look, that story is irrelevant, but it was really hard, right? And I said on stage after having a conversation with someone that had battled hardcore breast cancer, and she said to me that it's something I would never want to happen again, obviously, but I'm grateful it did. Right. And you think about that with those challenging times, it's a little bit like that with just the past in general. Like everything that has occurred, every little tiny little butterfly effect, it's brought us to where we are now with all the stuff that we now embody. So it sets a platform for this one long present moment that we continue to flow through, hopefully.
Yeah.
And look, thanks so much for coming on today, John.
Thanks for having me, mate.
This has been wonderful. You are definitely someone who's pursuing life in the flow zone.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.